Hello and welcome. We'll get started in just a second. I just want to make sure everybody has a time to get logged in here. We're going to start in just a minute. Just a reminder, you can access the prompt in the video description and a link in the video description. And we'll get started right now. Welcome to AP Lang. I'm Dawn Knight. I'm an English teacher in Westfield, Indiana. It's a suburb of Indianapolis. Welcome back if you've been tuning in, and if not, thanks for joining today. So we're going to get started today with our warm-up. Yesterday, we wrapped up Unit 8, during which our focus was looking at the use of sophisticated analogies that reflect rhetorical situation. For those just joining us, I'm going to read just a very first part of the passage. So even if you weren't here yesterday, you'll kind of know what's going on. Hold on, I have to get readers. I'm old. And then we'll talk about the answer and move on for today. So this is a passage from Zora Neale Hurston, first published in 1935. I was glad when somebody told me you may go and collect Negro folklore. In a way, it would not be a new experience for me. When pitched head foremost into the world, I landed in the crib of Negroism. From the earliest rocking of my cradle, I had known about the caper's Brer Rabbit is apt to cut, and what the squinch owl says from the housetop, but it was fitting me like a tight chemise. I couldn't see it for wearing it. It was only when I was off in college, away from my native surroundings, that I could see myself like somebody else and stand off and look at my garment. Then I had to have the spyglass of anthropology to look through at that. Okay, so the question here was in the second paragraph, the speaker employs the metaphor of a close fitting garment to express. So thinking about that passage we just read, the answer is B. In the passage, Zora Neale Hurston employs the metaphor of the close fitting chemise to express the difficulty of viewing her cultural heritage objectively. We can glean that from that second paragraph when she says, just after mentioning the garment, I couldn't see for wearing it. It was only when I was off in college, away from my native surroundings, that I could see myself like somebody else, in other words, objectively, and stand off and look at my garment. So don't worry if you didn't get the answer right. As we talked about with the Abigail Adams prompt in Unit 8, analyzing metaphors can be difficult, but the more we practice, the better we get. Okay, so what you need to know for today, we're moving into the complexities of argumentation with Unit 9. So let's look at our focus. We have two essential knowledge pieces here. One is effectively entering into an ongoing conversation about a subject means engaging in positions that have already been considered and argued about. So what's the current conversation? And when writers concede, they accept all or a portion of a competing position or claim as correct, or they agree that the competing position or claim is correct under a different set of circumstances, or they acknowledge the limitations of their own argument. So that's what we're going to start working on with this unit. Why this is important, this applies to both the synthesis and argument essays, and just a couple of things from the Chief Reader report. Students need to understand that with sources arguing among one another, students didn't have to accept each source as correct. Instead, the students needed to evaluate the provided information based on their own knowledge and perceptions of the world. Students were expected to understand how to integrate the support for competing arguments into their own. And students need to develop the argument on a topic by considering at every point how the evidence and explanations they supply connect to the argument being made. But it goes a lot further. It's also about empowering you to have a voice in really important conversations. So you learn to understand and participate in conversations about important, complex issues. So let's look at the last part of the synthesis essay rubric. And if you look at on the right-hand side, I've highlighted in orange there, A couple of elements to the scoring decision notes. First of all, crafting a nuanced argument by consistently identifying and exploring complexities or tensions across the sources. And then articulating the implications or limitations of an argument, either the student's argument or arguments conveyed in the sources, by situating it within a broader context. So the skills we're talking about relate directly to the synthesis and argument essays. Notice it's about the word sophistication again. This is that sophistication row. So we're looking at a more complex understanding in order to earn this point, which means we need to delve deeper or go beyond the surface. And I put the argument essay rubric here as well. It's really the same thing, except it doesn't mention across the sources, because for the argument essay, you don't get a packet of sources. You're using what you know from other classes, from books you've read, from your own experiences, and from your understanding of current issues. So obviously, the more informed you are, the more you have to draw from. Okay, so let's look at today's lesson. We're looking at into the idea of multiple perspectives of issues, which is an important element of achieving that sophistication in argument and in synthesis essays. We'll be exploring the complexities, delving deeper, and looking at going beyond black and white and into these shades of gray. And that'll make more sense in a little bit. So, a really quick example of this is the multiple perspectives of us being stuck at home right now. So, for example, I'm really enjoying extra time with my college age kids who are home, and they wouldn't normally be. But I also miss my other family and friends, and I'd love to go to a baseball game or an outdoor concert because the weather's starting to get nice in Indiana right now. So, it's definitely a little difficult. My dog, on the other hand, thinks this is great because his people are here all the time. So we have different perspectives on that issue. Okay, so let's look at how multiple perspectives relate to argument and synthesis essays. First, we tend to see the world in black and white. I like to show my students a TED talk called The Danger of a Single Story by Chimamanda Adichie, in which she discusses how Americans see Africa from a single perspective, and therefore they don't really understand it. They also associate her with that single perspective and then misunderstand her as well. Another person who I like to talk about in terms of these multiple perspectives is author Tim O'Brien, who discusses the dangers of absolutism, of seeing one view of the world and failing to understand others. This type of black and white thinking is prevalent in social media as well, especially as we have these algorithms that tend to show us what we want to see, that people who think like us, which reinforces our one sided view. And although memes can be hilarious, they also often convey these views of the world in a single perspective. It's kind of us versus them, or right versus wrong. And we have a tendency to see the world in these black and white terms then. So, how do we keep from doing that when we're looking at these complex issues? We want to try to avoid that my way's right and everyone else is wrong kind of thinking. So one of the ways to delve deeper into the complexities of an issue is to consider it from multiple perspectives. We can begin thinking about these perspectives by exploring them through various, I'll call it a lens or fields, worlds. If you've been like in an AP history class, I think sometimes they refer to them as worlds, but it's really looking at a variety of lenses to explore these perspectives from. So I put a list on this slide. It's not comprehensive in any way, but it does represent a good variety. So we're going to look at how we can use some of these lenses in order to see issues in a more complex way. All right, so we're going to practice with an issue that's not really emotionally loaded, colonizing Mars. Should we or shouldn't we colonize Mars? So first, I want you to just think about your position on this. Do you think that the United States should colonize Mars, or do you think that we should not? And I think we're going to try something new today. Instead of me pausing to let you do activities, I'm going to just let you freeze if you want to. You can pause your screen and take the time to do the activity, but we'll go ahead and move on. That way, if you need longer or shorter, you don't have to wait. So we all might have our own opinion of this, but before we determine whether this is something the US should really do, we need to fully understand it. So, what perspectives do is that they help us understand the situation a little bit better. So, if you look at that list again, I put it on this slide. I want you to think about which ones you think are actually the most important in thinking about the issue of colonizing Mars. So, for example, I think science would be an important one because we need to know if it's even feasible. Is there the technology available to get us to Mars, to create an atmosphere, to feed and sustain life there? So, scientifically, we definitely need to look into that perspective. Um, but I want you to take a couple of minutes to think about other of these lenses that you think would important in considering this. And again, you can just pause here if you want to take a couple of minutes to do that, and then I'll go ahead and move on. So this is what I came up with, and yours may vary from mine a bit, but we probably have some places where we overlap. And since I can't see yours, for the sake of discussion, we'll just use the ones that I highlighted here. And again, there may be others that I didn't think of or that aren't listed or that you think are more important, and that's great. But we're just going to use these to illustrate how this works. Notice I have several listed and they're from a range of fields or lenses. Um, so I'm already beginning to think about this in a complex way. It goes beyond just science. I'm thinking about some of the other implications of this particular topic. So now let's look into more depth into each of these lenses because there are probably perspectives within the various perspectives and sometimes disagreement or tensions within the lenses themselves. So I didn't take the time to write every possibility of every single perspective within these, but I wanted to just kind of show you with a representation to give you an idea. So, for example, in that science lens, we have the technological capability to create an atmosphere, to get colonists there, and even to sustain life. But we can't get colonists back home from Mars. Once they're there permanently. And the lifespan on Mars won't be as long as on Earth. Historically, it's important to consider the space race and how that inspired Americans and STEM learning. Um, but maybe people, even at that time, didn't agree that it was the best route. Economics, the technology to build an atmosphere and sustain life will be very expensive. And also, what would the economic system on Mars look like? So, there are some considerations and perspectives there. Environmentally, we need to colonize Mars in case Earth can no longer sustain life, some people think. Maybe others think we should invest in resources to save the Earth instead of to colonize Mars. And just a few more. In politics, probably different political affiliations will have different stances on colonizing. Um, have to consider what the government on Mars would look like and who would run that government. Wondering whether it's worth the expense because of the recognition for making that happen politically, or would it upset voters who think, it's not worth the expense because voters might be upset and that the money should be put somewhere else, like into debt relief or education. And then ethically, it could save human life if something were to happen to Earth down the road, but also ethically, colonists wouldn't be able to return and their lifespan wouldn't be as long. So you see within each of these perspectives, there are multiple perspectives, or within each of these lenses. So, by exploring the various perspectives within these fields or lenses, we begin to see this isn't a simple pro con or black and white issue. There are many complexities, or what I like to call shades of gray. There are political, environmental, and economic implications that make it reasonable to take either stance. That's where we fall into these shades of gray and acknowledge in our argument, acknowledging those in our argument, illustrate that we understand the complexities of the argument. And that's where we get into that sophistication of thought. It shows we've delved deeper. Yeah, I said it again. I say delve deeper all the time. So if you're new and haven't seen me before, it's really what I think the class is about: asking how, asking why, and delving deeper. Okay, so again, I'll have you pause here if you want to do this activity, but I'll go ahead and move on. So now that we've evaluated the multiple perspectives on the issue and thought it through, I want you to think about what your stance is. Just write down your position on whether to colonize Mars or not, and at least 3 reasons why you made that particular decision. I'll give you just a second to pause here. Okay, now let's think about the other side of the argument so that we're thinking in complex terms. It's likely that some of your reasons had opposing perspectives. So, next to your reasons, I want you to write down those oppositions or opposing points. So, for example, we can create an atmosphere on Mars to sustain Earth, is one of my reasons for why we should do it. But the opposition is that, yeah, but the lifespan of colonists will be shorter. So that's an opposing argument. Okay, so take a couple of minutes to do that or pause to do that, and we'll go ahead and move on. Okay, so once you move away from the black and white and into the more complex gray areas of argumentation, you end up with a more sophisticated, nuanced argument. Instead of we should or should not colonize Mars, a pro con, a very black and white argument that you see at the top of the screen there. It might look something more like, although we have the technology to colonize Mars, the money would be better spent investing in improving environmental issues on Earth. So, of course, there are a number of potential arguments here, and this is just one of numerous possibilities, but you can clearly see the difference. Notice how the more complex argument acknowledges the opposition and includes some of the most important fields and lenses of that issue. And look at how the more nuanced argument gets us into that right side of the rubric. It explores the complexities and tensions of the argument. It also begins to get us into the second point, acknowledging the implications or limitations of an argument by situating it within the broader context. What this means is that we're considering the implications or the impact that our stance will have, like it might be able to help us save lives, but also its limitations, the reason why it's not perfect, why it's imperfect, like that it will cost a lot of money. So we'll get in more depth into these points in later lessons, but I just wanted to kind of show how even with that one simple exercise, we're starting to get into those complexities. Today's exam practice is a multiple choice question again, and they won't be every time, but we're doing another one this time. Even though it's multiple choice, it still kind of includes that complexity of argument. So I want you to do this exam practice for tomorrow's lesson. You can access this exam practice in the link in the video description below. All right, thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll join us again tomorrow. Please remember to stay active and take care of yourselves, and know that all of us teachers out here are rooting for you. Thanks.